And this year for Finance Committee, we'll probably have a couple of these before budget's ready to go. Last year, you guys did amazing. We went to a zero-based budget, and we found a lot of interesting things that have been in different buckets throughout our budget that we were able to move around in unique ways. So thank you for your hard work last year, and we look forward to maybe it being a little simpler this year, but still putting in a lot of hard work here. I'll kick it off to Eric. I know we've got quite a few things to go through today, and then we'll probably reconvene in the next couple of weeks to touch base again. So.
All right. Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Hey, everyone. I know Brandy provided you guys an agenda. I don't know if the department head saw it or not, but I don't know that it'll take as long as I have on here. Talk about a few things that are going to affect every department as we gear up for budget season. And yes, I know it's only April, but we're going to start budget season now because it'll be here before you know it. And I'll talk about a few specific departments, chat a little bit about fire territory. Chief, I know you and Paige and our team are working through a few things there. There is some legislation that could affect fire territories as well that I'll talk about. I will provide an update on SB1. It's what Natalie and I were chatting about here before. I was in meetings all day yesterday, so I don't even know if there's been even changes in the last day and a half. And then obviously open it up for any questions. Keep this informal. Amber is on the line. Can you hear us now, Amber? Okay. All right. So if there's specific questions about process, so on and so forth, just raise your hand, shout it out, etc. for anybody. Sound good? And Amber, as I'm going through the beginning, why don't you pull up so all the department heads can see it, the kind of Gantt chart calendar on the screen. So the first piece I want to talk through is the financial planning / gearing up for budget season and budget calendar. I think you all, Finance Committee, have a handout. Looks like this. I know it's pretty small. Amber's pulling it up here so you guys can somewhat see it on the screen. We do this purposely so that it doesn't have a bunch of dates. We have dates behind all of this, but what this is showing you is in quarters of the year, all the financial reporting either Lori has to do, has done, reporting that's required to the state for your budget, TIF, so on and so forth. But then also the budget worksheets, calendar, capital planning, all those things, Form 1s that you all do with us, with Lori. That's what we're getting into now if you look kind of in the middle of the screen. Okay, so you can see there's a lot of green rectangles or aqua, so to speak. That's the work all you guys are going to be doing with us and Lori here over the next few months. Okay, and for the Finance Committee, we have scheduled on May 8th meetings with all the department heads to go through capital plans. Amber, have we sent those out yet, or you'll be sent? I know not the calendar appointments, but the actual last year capital plans for update. Okay, so each of you, this is the same process we went through in the past. You're going to be getting from Amber an Excel file that'll show 5 years of capital. It'll be the same activity we've done historically where we need you to go through the 2024 year. Did you do it? Did it get delayed? Are you still going to do it? Is it coming off the list? Kind of move things around and looking at 25, 26, 27. Is everything accurate? We don't need it to the dollar. We don't even need it to the $1,000. We need it to be directionally accurate. So if you had a purchase of equipment that you had a $30,000 placeholder for, but because of inflation, maybe it's affected by tariffs, all the different things you're going to have to juggle here for a while, that may cost you $37,000 now. We need that update. Okay. Not asking you guys to call every single vendor that you have, but there's a lot of things going on here and changes, et cetera. So at least confirm some of those numbers, especially the big ticket items. And then we'll be adding in the 5th year now, a new year on the back. So typically what happens is you move some projects that you're probably not going to get to the 5th year. There's some new stuff coming on board, etc. As we started last year, and Amber, make sure you make this clear when you send these out. What I'd also like you guys to start doing, we started doing this a little bit last year, is after year 5, just have kind of a, kind of a bull ring, so to speak, of the next 2 to 3 years after that, of just throwing things in there. They're like, hey, yeah, I'm not going to get to these in the next 5 years, but I do know I have X, Y, Z I got to get to sometime in the next 8, 9 years. Okay. That starts to make this process easier and more streamlined in future years, because then you at least have already kind of had some forethought to what's out there farther as we add a new year in. Any questions from department heads, finance committee on that? Okay. That's, of all of this, I can't reiterate enough. I know, like Councilman Webb, you've asked these questions before, et cetera. This is probably the most important piece of the financial planning, okay? Because salaries, wages, operational cost, those are pretty easy to forecast. Capital is what moves your dial, okay? And capital of how are we going to pay for it? Are we going to leverage and use debt? Are we going to use cash reserves? Are we going to spread it out through lease payments? That is the piece that will change your bottom line year over year, okay? So, and you guys did a great job last year. Just take that serious. It's not like, hey, I think this is going to cost me somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000. Like, call your vendor, call your engineer, try to get a fairly accurate number. Make sense? Okay. And this is civil side and utility. Same thing. We're updating these both. The other pieces to the calendar then that you'll see in this as you go through, and Amber and our team will, as we get closer to it, we'll put dates out there. We'll work through Lori's office. We'll be doing those budget worksheets again. I know last year that was a heavy lift for everybody. Those are the ones that has every single line item, your 100s, 200s, 300s. We work with Lori's office on the 100s. You guys really do the 2s and 300s. We'll give you 3 years historical actual spends. And then again, I call it zero-based budgeting. You can call it priority-based budgeting. There's a bunch of different names to it. What we're looking at is 2 prongs. Last year was the first step where, and as a reminder for council, we started really identifying some of those places where, hey, you've only spent $20,000 on average every year for 3 years. Why are we budgeting 40? Okay. Remember, we dove into a lot of those last year and made a pretty big improvement. This year, we're going to take another little step forward. It's, okay, you've been spending $20,000 every year historically in this supplies line. Is there anything we can do different in there to save dollars? All right. And I'm not going to speak for council. This is not council speak for themselves. From my opinion and everything that I've dealt with your council and your administration, this is not like a hatchet job, hate to use federal government. I'm not coming in to tell you guys to cut costs and to cut people and to do things like that. All I'm asking you to do is look at line items and, hey, we've bought our salt from this vendor and we've never, and I don't even know if this is accurate, we've never done bulk pricing with the county or something like that. Let's at least explore it. Okay. That's what we're going to this year. Look at your line items, especially your big ones. Is there any way to rethink a place to save some dollars? Okay. And we're not even coming in here and saying like, hey, we're going to save 3% or 2%. There's no magical number we're trying to hit. This is really just, let's scrutinize the budgets to a zero-based, a justified budget. And if the budget is fuel, hey, we spend X number, X gallons is what we use in the police department on fuel each year. Fuel prices have steadied out here pretty well. We think it's going to stay relatively in the same ballpark. So I'm keeping it flatlined, or I'm increasing it 2%. That's justification. Okay. What's not justification is, hey, we spent this last year, I'm going to add 10% for no reason. Does that make sense? So this isn't a huge undertaking. It's just getting you guys more in every single line item and justifying the spending. Any questions from anybody on that? I really think it'll be easier for you guys this year. It's the same thing we went through last year. It's just taking another step. You guys are used to the program now. The following year, year 3, I really think this will be almost so streamlined. As Lori will give you these, you guys will know what to do. You'll fill them out. We'll throw them in Form 1s, and it'll be done in 24 hours, right, Lori? Kidding, not that fast. Any questions on that process though? That'll be coming midsummer, probably in that June-ish, July timeframe. We usually like to try to get June financials, but we may come out a little bit earlier than that. So capital first, operations second, and then Lori, I'll get to this later in the agenda. Amber, myself, and team will be working with you on the 100s in the HR department. We'll kind of get the salary stuff around to it. So as you guys are meeting with Amber on your capital plans, that'll be a question she has for you is personnel. Okay. And we're not really at this point, because, this is more with the administration and council. We're not asking like, what raises do you want to give? We're asking, hey, do you have people retiring? Do you have new hires that you have to fill? Do you have somebody going out with 30 years experience that was making X and you're going to rehire that position with somebody with 5 years experience? Okay. That's going to move the dial on the financials. Those are the pieces we need for your departments. Good. Okay. Amber, did I miss anything you can think of there in the calendar? And Lori, we have a draft, and I think we went through this with you too, Natalie, at the beginning of kind of the actual budget dates as we get into August, September, et cetera. We'll want to finalize those probably in May. I know you already put some stuff in Gateway. We'll just want to make sure, like, you're not going to have people on vacation and things like that, so we can finalize all of that. Okay. All right. Anything on general large scale budget process capital planning? Any questions? Any questions from council, administration? Okay. The next item on the agenda leads into it, but it's more specific to department. So IT, we're going to talk about. If you remember last fall, last summer, we started talking about it. Then in the fall, we mentioned this. We had some discussion about centralizing the IT budget within the general fund as its own department. So it'd be similar to the other departments that you have. As a reminder, your IT budget right now is split between pretty much most of the departments, the utilities. Okay, so they have a line item, they pay for part of what goes to fund, and I'm not an IT guy, so can't really explain all the ins and outs of it, but you spread that around each department. There's pros and cons of both of these. The number one, as your financial consultant, the number one reason I would encourage you to centralize this is it makes budget accountability much easier for you to see. Okay, so right now, if you wanted to say, well, what have our IT costs done in the last 5 years? All right, you have to go to every department that has an IT line item, every utility. Like, I can't even tell you off the cuff what that number would be, because you have to go find that in every single department, add it up and say, okay, we've done this, 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 and this for the last 5 years. If you take that all into the general fund as its own department, then it looks to you all just like police or fire or parks. It's a standalone. You can say, this is what we're spending. This is what we're spending it on. And it's all self-contained. Okay. That's why we're recommending it. It's totally you guys' choice whether you want to do that or not. Now, the thing you have to think of is if you take that all and put it into the general fund, now you're supporting it all from property tax, income tax, and the general fund. The way, though, that you can still share that cost with utilities is you have the utilities pay in or pay a share of the IT budget to the general fund. Okay. So I'm going to make numbers up because we haven't done the analysis yet, but let's say we decide electric, AES, water, sewer each owe $50,000 for IT on average a year. They just make a payment out of their department into the general fund, comes in as a revenue, and then Lori uses that as part of the general fund payment for IT cost. Then you may say, well, what about like fire or police, where they're separate funds, they're outside of the general fund? Same way. Now, fire is a little tricky because of the territory, but I'm not going to get into those weeds right now. You can shift a little bit of your max levy out of those back into the general fund to account for, hey, Parks Department, you no longer have IT costs coming from your budget. They're all centralized to the general fund. And we'll make that so the math is equal. Like nobody's going to lose on this. Nobody's going to gain on this. The cost moves, the revenue moves. That's all it is. Now, if you want to do that, and I put this in the agenda, there is a process we need to go through. I simplified this, but in general terms, we need to identify and separate every single line item in your budget, utilities and civil side, that has IT related to it. Now, the one thing that'll be a little bit tricky is if any IT costs get into, like a shared operational line, like a miscellaneous supplies, and hey, they're buying a computer out of it or something like that. That's where we just got to make sure that we're getting everything captured that we're going to move over, okay, from every department. Then we review and analyze historical data for at least the last 3 years on every one of those accounts. So they're all over all these different departments, but we go back and basically recreate a centralized history. Create the new department in your general fund. So it'd be just like your other departments, Lori, general fund dash IT or whatever you want to call it. It's going to have 1s, 2s, 3s, and 400s, just like you create your chart of accounts, just like every department that you have. You'll then prepare a centralized budget worksheet. Everything will be right there. And then we'll adjust every other department's budget worksheet to remove those costs from historical spending. Okay. That sounds somewhat easy. That's a decent amount of work, though, to create that. At the end of the day, then that proves to you all before you adopt a budget what I just said earlier. We're moving the expense and we're moving an equal revenue over. So nobody's the gainer, nobody's the loser in that equation. Then going forward, you have it all in one spot. Much, much easier for you guys to account for. And then, when you guys have a big server upgrade or everybody needs new laptops or whatever that is, just like you see in fire, police, parks, streets, etc., that's going to be on the capital plan. And that needs to be prioritized against, paving or against buying a fire truck or whatever it is. And you got to juggle those capital costs just like you do in every other department. Okay. I know that's a big change. So questions? Yeah, Chief.
A question on that. For example, like IT handles all cell phones. So our department has cell phones. Would that incorporate billing, all that for your monthly fees? How far does that go down in the weeds?
We have to work through all kind of the fine details, but you can move it all there. I mean, it's just, again, you're using property tax or income tax or lit, one of the three, income tax, to pay that right now. We just want to make sure if that's a $50,000 a year cost coming out of your budget, I have no idea what it is. If we move that cost into centralized IT, we got to get that same revenue moved into the general fund for that. If it's coming out of your budget, it's already in the general fund. If it's coming out of public safety lit or something, then that's where we have to kind of do the math. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that's really where I kind of need you from a operational standpoint. When we say IT, that can be pretty far reaching. Like, what really are we going to say is IT? Is it all the way down to cell phones? Is it only like your salary, your department salary, benefits, computers, servers, maintenance, that sort of stuff? That's through this process where we have to draw the fine line. Other questions? Any thoughts on?
I'd say anything we administrate, anything we have direct control over that they pay into, that might be something that's used directly for them, but we maintain, definitely should be coming out of So I'd agree with that line of thing.
It's a good point too, like your subscription services or your maintenance contracts, etc. I'm not going to say this is happening. It would not surprise me though, when you have that so bifurcated and so many departments are paying into it. It's hard. Like, I'm sure but it's hard for everyone to know, like, well, what are we paying for our maintenance contract for servers or whatever it is? This will be really clear. And then you'll potentially see opportunities for cost savings there too. It's like, well, are we duplicating, contracts? Are we duplicating service between different departments?
I think they'll see some cost savings just because with administrative turnover, things that, say there's some department heads who are in their positions for a long time and others who, are just now starting off. Going through, your predecessor might have been using some services and that just keeps getting renewed and you're part of it.
So you're talking like licensing.
Yeah, licensing.
Yeah.
Just you're always in the loop, you know, it's never brought up. And I think this would be a good way we can actually peel through that
Yep.
and move some of that.
I mean, we see that all the time in our own business and in businesses that we advise on. You come in and once you centralize things, you start saying, well, why do you have 57 licenses and you're only using 40 and you're paying for all of that? Well, it's because, well, my department's always had 5 and my department's always had 7 and mine's always had 3. And then when you look at it all together, you realize that you're inefficient. Any concerns from department heads that have, you guys kind of have managed this line item historically through your budgets? Are there any concerns or questions from you guys?
I know that there's several departments that have large format plotters. All the departments have printers, copiers. I'm not sure how far we're talking about that. We pretty much maintain our plotter. Electric has a big plotter. There's maintenance agreements, there's monthly fees for materials. But I would think that'd be a great idea if that was all under one department, one envelope.
Mm-hmm.
We got GPS equipment that's costly and it has maintenance agreements. It gets updated about every 5 to 7 years. There's several departments that have GPS equipment. Are we going to go that far?
So when we've done this other places, and I'm speaking without knowing operationally all the ins and outs. That's what we have to kind of work through in kind of this process is I would start with what you said earlier. What do you manage already? Like what already is you're reviewing the contracts, you're reviewing the licenses, you're when a problem occurs, you're who gets called, so to speak. Start there. But then all those other ones like that you're mentioning, Daryl, we got to put those on the list. And then I think it's a discussion of, well, in year 1, do we not move those all over? Because you may not have the history of, what it really takes to manage this. But I think by year 2 or 3, that may be the wish of the council and the administration is, yeah, let's move those all into here. And it can be a process. Because what I don't want to do is take things you've never dealt with before and say, well, now we're throwing them under your management. And, now it's just kind of created a mess. We got to kind of do that in a structured format.
I would think for a department like ours, where our team handles the majority of our stuff internally and other agreements, that it would just be continuing to be done the way we're doing it now for agreements.
Yeah, you guys are a little bit different.
I agree with like Susan's line of thinking, like key operational things like that we don't manage.
Right.
It might be perceived as a IT cost. I still think should probably be towards their operational budget.
You're right, and you said it earlier. I think in year 1, where you want to draw the line is, what do you really control? Like, what is your management decision as that department head? Okay, because you don't want to be making decisions for stuff that it's really Susan's on the line for, does this work or does this not, type thing. Okay. Any questions from?
No, I think this is the right direction to go. When my conversations with IoT, looking forward with cybersecurity specifically, and what we do with IT from a Muni perspective, there's lots of conversations about doing this. So if we can stay ahead of the game, and there's opportunities for grants as we go forward, this is going to be one of the stipulations. So I think it's great. I think it'll give us opportunity to save, like you said, and see really what's in that budget moving forward.
Yep.
So you're looking to centralize IT into the general fund type budget. So utilities would be shifting over there, which I have a little bit of a problem with because we're looking at fee-based things and rates that we review. So in a few years, is IT totally lost in general fund and we're not raising the rates to accommodate for what those utilities need?
Very good concern. So the way we guard against that is, yes, if we move, and it's like the example earlier, it wouldn't be every probably perceived IT cost to be moved, but the things that are a shared service, so to speak. So licensing and different maintenance contracts, if we move those all to general, we have to decide, and you all have to decide, what percentage of those costs are electric, water, sewer, AES. Okay. And what I would recommend, this is how other communities typically do it. I wouldn't say from year to year, well, it's because, Todd called me 17 times and Susan only called me 10. So Todd needs to pay more and Susan less, or whatever that is. What you look at, and this is where the IT department really is heavily relied upon, on average, how much equipment, how much maintenance contract, how much use of this department goes to electric, goes to water, goes to sewer, goes to AES. And you put specific percentages. Now, those can change over time, but you start at a specific percentage. That department then is paying the general fund. So you don't lose the cost from there. They're just making, instead of making a payment to this maintenance contract and this person and this vendor, they're making their payment for IT to the general fund. So your rates still have to support it in future rate studies. Now, why that makes it actually easier to manage in your rates as you guys have to adopt future rate increases is because now you as a department, you know what you're budgeting for. You don't think, well, it's going to be 50,000 this year and then it's going to be 100,000 the next and it's going to be 25,000 the year after that because I needed a piece of equipment. It's really over the long term, how much of my department needs to support IT cost. Now, as we'll talk later in Senate Bill 1, what may end up happening in the future, because you guys control the utility rates at the council level, I'm going to say may happen, it almost is going to happen. You're going to see a shift of burden from property tax supported funds to utility supported funds. Okay. So you're probably over time going to have to shift more costs. I know the utility folks probably don't like to hear that, but if you're losing money on the property tax side, and depending on the county legislation for income tax, depending how much control you have over income tax, you all aren't going to have options. You can't say, well, we need more money in the general fund to pay for IT, because you don't have control of raising that revenue source. Does that make sense? What you do have control over is saying, well, water now, instead of sharing 30% of the cost, you're going to share 35 because we can adjust water rates here locally. And probably nobody likes to hear that, but that is the direction we've been going ever since property tax caps in 2010. And if Senate bill passes the way it's written now, that's the direction you're going to keep going. That's why you see communities doing things like increasing payment in lieu of tax from their utilities into the general fund. All that's doing is saying, well, we can raise water and sewer rates based on our vote. We can't raise property taxes. Let's shift costs to the things we control.
So yeah, now you got my wheels turning. So the fund in lieu of property tax, I was told that's a set formula and we can't change that.
It's a set formula for the cap. You can be anything below that number. And almost every community in Indiana is below what the cap is. The cap is based on the tax rate and the net assessed value of your system. Okay.
Well, I'm all for utilities shifting what they need to the general fund to pay for services and stuff. So I didn't know all the ins and outs of how we can do that.
This is a way, what we just talked about in IT, payment in lieu of tax is a way, the way that you share overhead, what I'll say overhead costs, that's things like council, administration, shared supplies, et cetera. The trend is very prevalent in the last decade, and it's going to continue. More and more of that cost will have to be borne by revenue derived funds, which are your utilities.
I guess, and I'm kind of planting the seed that in the future, I'm going to want to know more how that fund is determined for the city of Auburn.
Yep.
So for future reference.
Amber, can we add that to the, I know we've looked at that in the past, but just update it based on 24 financials, what their pilots are versus the cap. Yep, we can do that. It's pretty easy.
If I can ask a quick question, this is based on something that has happened in Auburn. So years ago, the water department needed to increase their funds, didn't want to raise their rates. So they started to charge the fire department a hydrant maintenance fee. Then 10 years later, the fire department needs personnel. They don't want to raise taxes. So they eliminate the hydrant maintenance fee and raise water rates. Is that the kind of thing that we're shifting towards? I mean, that kind of creative things, those kind of creative things tend to make me a little nervous.
Somewhat, but I'd say the one variable that no longer is here, that was here 10 years ago, is you're not under the IURC anymore. So, and I wasn't around 10 years ago, so I'm speaking for people that.
Well, it's longer ago than that. I don't want to admit it because I don't want to say how old I am. But
my assumption of what happened is saying, hey, yeah, we need to raise our water rates, but to raise our water rates, it's going to take us a year and it's going to take us $200,000 in attorneys and accountants and all of this to go to the IURC to get a rate increase, because you used to be under that restriction. So they were creative to say, how can we get more money without having to go through that pain? Since you've opted out of the IURC, you now locally, if you decide, say, well, we really need 10% more revenue in water, it's just like sewer. It goes to you guys as a council. You have a public hearing and you can adopt that adjustment. So I don't think we're going to be that creative, but you are going to see places where you say, as a council, I don't think it'll be the 2026 budget, but maybe in 27, where you see things and say, you know, our revenues have flatlined or dropped because of the max levy growth quotient changes that are in Senate Bill 1 potentially. And you say, well, we got no growth in revenue, but we just saw $500,000 increases in operating costs because of inflation or whatever it is, 4 or 5%. And you say, well, we have no control to balance our budget because we can't raise property taxes. Depending on what the legislation does, the county has to raise income taxes. That may change. So you can't raise your general fund revenue. So then you start saying, Eric, how do we offset this 500,000? Because I'm not comfortable with an unbalanced budget. The way you start balancing that budget is shifting cost or increasing pilot or increasing payments from the places you do control, which is water, sewer, electric, somewhat AES rates. Does that make sense? That's what you're going to start seeing. Now, you guys don't get totally hammered by tax caps here. You saw communities, especially heavily industrial, older communities like the Andersons, the Muncies, the Goshens. You saw them start doing this 10 years ago because of tax caps, because they got hit overnight with a $2 million, $3 million loss because of the number of people that hit caps. You're going to see a similar issue here if business personal property tax goes away. And I'll talk about that later. Did that answer the question?
it does, yes.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I guess this is just kind of my opinion on this, but this could be a tricky year budget process with the tariffs and SB1, where we could see a lot of unknowns coming up in 2026. Would you agree with that? It's going to be different. I mean, the real budget wasn't horrible to deal with.
Mhm.
This plays in another tricky factor. It's like Randy had to adjust. I think he had to adjust the vehicle because also they throw 25% on the vehicle is the tariff. And that's going to be a trick, I think.
It totally is. And the smart aleck in me is going to say, we should know in about 10 days what's going to happen with SB1. And who knows, in 2 minutes, we may know what's happening with tariffs. At this point, it could go back and forth. So yeah, if we get to June and this whole trade thing is still up in the air, et cetera, we'll know what SB1 is at that point. Then this is going to sound counter to what I've told you guys for 4 or 5 years. You may need to build some buffers into your Form 1s. The way I suggest we do buffers, though, is Lori does those where you guys still budget accurately. You say, what I know today, what I know on history, I'm not going to try to play, does China have a tariff on steel or not in 6 months or whatever that is. I'm just going to do what I know. And then Lori and us work and say, okay, here's the accurate budget. And council, we added in this department a $50,000 buffer line item, like that you can see it clearly as a line item. Okay. And then that avoids you having to do a bunch of additional appropriations in the future, but it doesn't create bad budgets where you guys are adding 10% to every line item. It creates a specific line item where we know this is the use it if kind of all hell breaks loose type thing. Yes. In their department. Yes. Does that make sense? Now, hopefully by the time we get to the summer, there's a lot of clarity on some of this stuff.
That was gonna be my question, is with all the unknowns, the next thing you know, we'll come to council in July of next year saying, hey, I'm wanting to this and that. But I think that buffer, where obviously the council always has to prove that, would help.
It does,
Almost in case.
because as I told you guys last year, and this is not in Auburn, I mean, this is an issue I see on almost every community we work with in the state of Indiana. When you start adding those 10%, because just, and maybe it's tariffs this year, and maybe it was inflation 3 years ago, and maybe it's another bill next year in the state house, whatever it is. Every year there's something where you're like, well, I don't know how this is going to play out. When you start doing that with every line item and you start adding 10%, 5%, 15%, whatever it is, you get to the end of that. And as you guys saw on the worksheets last year, you add that up cumulatively and you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of what I would say inaccurate budgeting. Okay. We really want you accurate on the budgets because as we extrapolate it out, we want it to be a clear picture. And two, inaccurate budgets, and I know no one's doing this on purpose, but they create a lack of accountability. Because once that budget's approved in that line item, you don't have to come back to the elected board, right? None of you guys are elected. They're elected. They're supposed to represent the people. If you have buffers in all your line items, you don't ever have to come back and say what you just said, Chief, like, hey, I ordered a police car and when I ordered it, it was $65,000, but now because of tariffs on some piece of equipment on it, it's $75,000 when I get it delivered. That is something when you come back, you should tell that story to the tax-paying public through council approval. Now, Lori doesn't, in the example I just gave you, Lori doesn't have to do all the paperwork on an additional appropriation because she just says, hey, this is where we had the additional money for these unknowns sitting here. Council, all I have to do is a shift of appropriation. And that's just a piece of paper that she has to file at the end of the year. Okay. But you still come back, you still say, this is why I budgeted X and it ended up being Y, and tell that story. And we're not talking, like I said, like, I'm not talking you wanted to buy a printer and you thought it was going to be $300 and it was $325. I mean, we're talking big ticket items that change from the plan. Or you hire someone and it wasn't in the plan. Like, again, I've dealt with this in many communities. You should not have enough money in your 100s to go hire an extra position that you never had originally budgeted for. I mean, that means your budget's way too high. You should be coming back and saying, look, we need this position because of X. Didn't have it in the budget, but we need it now. Okay. That's different than open positions, by the way. I'm saying like non-planned for positions.
So you said a comment about utilities paying into the general fund for the IT department. What about the non-utilities? I mean, let's say Florida's got all this licensing and everything else. Where's that money coming from to pay for that?
That's the piece when we go through this exercise, we have to see, you know, is Chief already paying that through his general fund department budget? Because if so, then it doesn't matter because it's all still in the general fund. It's just moving it from his expense side to the IT department expense side. If it's something he's paying though from like public safety lit, that's a whole different fund. So if we move the expense, you can't move public safety lit to the general fund. So we have to figure out how do we get additional revenue to general to replace, you know, so it's a 1-for-1 shift. Does that make sense?
I guess what I'm saying is the utilities aren't going to be paying the bill for everybody.
No. It's going to be just like it is now, except we got to work with the administration council department and say, you know, is it right now? You know, and that's something I'm going to heavily rely on the IT department for. Like if, well, electric's always just paid this amount, but that's a lot more than electric really should be paying. You know, we'll come back and explain that to everybody and make those decisions. But the starting point is it's exactly split like it is now. It's just instead of the department paying it individually, it all gets paid from one department, the general fund, and we shift the corresponding revenue over as well to help pay that. Not shifting extra cost of utility. What I was saying about that is you may have to do that over time in the future because of some of these SB1 changes. Good questions. Anything else on IT? Oh, I did have one. Last year at budget time, we talked about that you have an agreement with the county or something, and I think you guys brought this up. Do we want to revisit that? I don't know where that stands.
Yeah, so they have put together an agreement with the county. It's been in the county's hands for several months. I had spoken with some of the commissioners last week. We anticipate that back on the 14th.
Okay.
Next Monday. And I've had to put some clear expectations. So I'm confident we'll have it back on the 14th. It's got some revised rates, I believe. Basic rates, Mayo was 75 an hour. Then there was a 150 charge for some additional services. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, sounds all
I
right.
believe so. Yeah. And then obviously then we have some cost shares for some of our programs.
Okay. So that's something Milo and Amber put this one. We'll want to get some extra time with him and his department because I'll want to understand, like, is that generating how much revenue? You know, what's the cost share side of it? We'll want to kind of pencil that all out through the budget process. I know there'll be estimates in year one. Okay. Anything else on that topic? All right. Next one that I had on the list was fire territory. And Chief, I just talked with Paige yesterday or the day before, so you may even know more than I do on this. I think you guys are working through developing what the budget would look like if this goes forward, because that's what would set the tax rate. I put in the packet for the finance committee. This is the way it stands now, how a timeline works to establish fire territory. Now, there is proposed legislation that will change this. Okay. So I'll say more to come on what this will actually look like. But what you can see is it's a over 12-month process before you're all done with it. I don't know, Chief, I'll go through high level kind of considerations, why you would want to do this, why this makes sense. But do you have any updates you want to give on just how it's kind of went so far?
We're meeting next Wednesday or Tuesday, the 15th, with Jackson to review the proposed budget. So we send it out to
Okay. So again, just to reiterate what we talked about last year, why you'd want to consider this, it expands your tax base that supports fire. It gets away from them paying you a fee to provide fire protection, that the fee almost, I don't know that I've ever seen one that it actually covers the cost to provide that. So it's the most efficient and most fair way to say, look, you want us to provide fire protection. You have an assessed value base of X in that area. We have an assessed value base of Y in this area. We put it all together and we say, this is what it costs us to provide fire over that entire area for a year. This is what the tax rate needs to be. We all pay it based on our assessed value. Okay, that's what this would go to. Typically what you'll see, I'm not saying this is what you'll see until Paige does her analysis because it'll be based on the budget. You see the more densely populated areas, so cities, tax rate come down a little bit, and the more sparsely populated areas, tax rate come up a little bit. There's two reasons for that. One, those outliers, the township has not been paying a tax rate. Okay. They've been paying a fee that likely doesn't cover the cost. And two, the cost to provide fire, have trucks, have people and access points to fight fire, provide fire suppression in a city or metropolis area is much more efficient than to provide it in a rural area where you may have a house every 2 miles. It's no different than utilities. It's the reason it costs more to provide electric and cyber and everything else out in the country versus in a town. You have people living right next to each other. Does that make sense? Now, there are some provisions and this is actually in the SB1 handout at the end, but I made some notes. There's a couple of provisions around fire. Let's see if I can find that and just read them off to you. So it would cap a fire territory tax rate at 0.4% if this passes. So that's going to be, that formula is just based on what the budget's going to be, Chief, when you guys get it done, and the assessed value it's spread over. Okay. So more than likely that's not going to inhibit you from doing this. It's just if you come back to hey, it takes a tax rate of 0.45 and this legislation passes, you're going to have to figure out, can we reduce the budget, or how are we going to afford a budget when we're capped at a 0.4% tax rate? And then the bigger piece to this is, and this is a piece that I think they're trying to get stricken, requires county to approve all fire territories. So you may get all this planning done and make total sense, and the townships and the city all want to do it, and then the county still has to say yes. Now, this is not a DeKalb County most counties that we work in, like if the provider units and the townships come to them and say, look, we want to do this because it makes sense, they're likely going to approve it. Why would they not? Some of this legislation came from some of the issues you guys probably saw last 2 years down in Allen County with the fire territories, and that's part of what's driving this language of what happened down there. I don't know. You guys probably know better than I. Do you think you'll have an issue with the county if this passes? Judging by your face, maybe. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well,
I will not elaborate on that.
Okay.
But I will say this is the first I've seen the timeline in this packet, so thank you. It does fall in line with some of our conversations. I'll say that. I have given them a hard deadline of right around June 15th, middle of June, which
Okay.
falls right in line with what you have here. Because for budget purposes, we will have to know which way we're going to proceed, even for 2026, because your statement was correct that when you do a contract, it doesn't necessarily cover the costs. I will state a fact here. I believe the contract is at $96.25 or $96.85 a quarter.
96.25 last year should be 10.
Yeah, okay. So we had 98 runs from May 1st through December 31st at 96.25. They did pay us for the second, third, and fourth quarter. But if you use the FEMA scale on the cost of having a unit respond, personnel, and so forth, it came out to just over $50,000 using that scale. And, per the contract, we were at just under 29. So just to put that in perspective, that's why it's definitely something that we really need to look at. So.
And that story is not uncommon from what I see in most communities. It's, like I said, I can't think in 20 years of one time I've seen a contract that a township was actually probably paying the cost of what it took. Okay. I know this is only one part. Any questions, any comments on that, Chief?
It definitely makes me nervous going forward, whether territories are the best thing. It does limit what the fire department can do.
And I know you know this, but the general comment is, yeah, are territories the right solution? There's arguments, right? Yes and no. There's a huge issue though with volunteer fire departments around the state. I mean, if you're going to provide fire protection in rural areas, it's almost the only option at this point, just because you can't get volunteer fire staffed. So
One other question in our budgets, in money that shortfall, that out. So if I continue to use the accurate budget numbers, that should cover that shortfall, and the new rate should cover that shortfall.
when you say the new rate, are you saying like if you do the new fire territory? Yes.
It will take into account that shortfall, jump us back up.
Correct, because you reset, you add in the new area, well, you dissolve and you create the new territory, adding in the new area. That's what we often say, your second bite of the apple. You can reset your operational cost, which resets your levy. Okay. I think we're on track, or maybe a few minutes behind. Parks. Okay, this was another one that came up last year. I'm not going to rehash, but everybody, and Eric's in here, the temporary loan, all those things where we were getting, It was to reiterate for the council, it was a cash flow issue. Majority of park revenue comes twice a year, June, December, when you get property taxes. We were running at a deficit where we didn't have cash reserves to cover that 6 month to get to the next tax payment. So we did temporary loans to cover that. I think we're out of needing to do that. I'll have to see how 24 finals shake out. So plan would not be to come back for any more temporary loans. I think we've at least built up cash enough. But the question was asked, okay, what are our solutions to park? And the most clear solutions are you cut spending, you get a balanced budget, you reduce the budget to be in line with revenues, you increase revenues so you can afford the budget that park wants to have. There's two ways primarily to increase revenues for park. One is, like you've done in some past budgets, you shift more of your levy, your property tax dollars to park. So you take it away from streets or general or something like that, and you shift more revenue to park. The second option, the one this bullet point's talking about, or a combination of those options, are you review the fee structure of park. Okay. And that's almost like what you were talking about earlier, Councilman White. It's almost like you run it like a utility from the services side. And you say, okay, we're going to do these programs. We're going to do, this throughout the community. We're going to charge a fee to attend those or to be a participant in those, et cetera. And we want the fee to cover the cost or cover 75% of the cost or whatever you decide. Okay. I don't come into this saying there's no negatives to doing that. I mean, a lot of places look at parks and green space of your property taxes go to pay for this. We should be able to provide kids events and green space and upkeep and all these things. I'll come back to what I said earlier. Take Senate Bill 1 off the table. Just go back the last 5 years. Property taxes are your number one revenue source on the civil side. Your property tax revenues, net of tax caps, have averaged somewhere between 3.5% and 4% a year in increase. As you have staffed up departments, you're maintaining more in parks. I know it's been an initiative of this administration and even prior ones of having a better park system. You're spending more money there. Your cost side has went up dramatically more than 3.5% or 4%. Okay. That's the math problem that we have to solve here. Okay. So then you have to make the decision. Again, I'll just reiterate and then we'll open it up. Either we're not going to provide those services or we're going to cut cost, or we're going to do services less. We're not going to buy as much stuff. We're not going to have as many part-time employees in the summer. We're going to cut costs somewhere. We're going to shift levy, which again, this is then a priority thing as a council. It's, do we want less streets and less sidewalks? I'm using this generically. Less streets, less sidewalks. We have more summer help trimming park areas or more programs for free. Or the third option is we say, hey, all these programs we subsidized in the past, you want to be part of, and I don't even know if you guys run the Little League through parks, but you want to play Little League, like the Little League my kids are in, it's $60 a T-baller now, which I think is crazy to play T-ball, but that's their cost to operate that league and not subsidize it. Do you start doing that to generate revenue to pay for these programs? That's what this bullet point is about. Because I think Natalie's asked this. I think this came up last year when we were talking about temporary loans. We've done that for other communities. We can look at your whole fee structure, all the services and programs parks provides. And the place we start as accountants is say, okay, Eric, to run the Little League program, again, I don't know if you guys do this, or to run the XYZ program that people have to do in the parks program, how do you staff it? How many hours does it take? What supplies do you buy? We create a cost structure and we say it's costing you $40,000 a year to run this program. By charging, again, these are made up numbers, $10 per participant, you're generating $10,000. To offset that $30,000 subsidization that's coming from property taxes, you need to charge $45 a participant. That's where we start. And then you guys make decisions of, well, we don't want to do that. We want to phase it in. We don't like that idea. Okay. I know that's a sea change probably from history, but questions, comments?
I can't help myself. Auburn has, parks have evolved over the years, which it's a good evolvement. Strictly maintenance maybe before, I don't know how many years, 10, 15 years ago or whatever. And now we're maintenance and programs. I definitely want to see a separation of the costs, because you got maintenance. You got to have maintenance. That buildings need painted, machines need painted, or not painted, but repaired and stuff. So that's a fixed deal. We have to do that, and it may raise every year, whatever. And then your programs are your flexible part, but I don't want to steal from maintenance to do the programs. If we do fee structures, I worked for the Auburn Community Pool in 1970 to 1975. So I was employed by the city before anybody else here was. But yeah, we tried to break even in that fee structure. We did it 1 year. It was a big celebration. We actually broke even, and we had to work hard at it to get, we were charging swim club a little bit of money and the amount in the doors, but we don't want the programs to be money makers. But yeah, they should come closer. If there's grant money available for programs and stuff, that would be, they should be, Park Department should be applying for that. So it's just emphasize, I don't want to steal from maintenance to pay for programs, and I want to have programs. So it's kind of a catch-22 there.
I think the only other bullet point I had was to utilize the strategic plan that we did with several pages in there for the grant opportunities that are available for parks, just to see if we can maybe come up with a strategic plan within the grant opportunities that are available.
Any thoughts, Eric, from yours?
Well, I just think, we do have a separation, obviously, we have a reverted and non-reverted budget. Actually, it's not the programs. They are self-sufficient staff. So we do provide that, and we at zero cost.
Well, yes, you have reverting, non-reverting, but like your salary and the parks program salaries are all in the, see, that's, if you want a true cost base, that's what I went to. Like people running those programs, Eric's time planning those programs or assistant part, like if you truly want them to be self-sustaining, a portion of that and benefits and fuel and people driving to those things, and that truly all is part of providing that program. Okay. So I'm not arguing, but that's what I'm saying is like, that's where you start to get subsidization. Because to your point, Councilman, is when you were just maintenance 15 years ago, you didn't have as many employees in parks. Make sense?
I think parks is unique because they have a maintenance and they have programs, but we're always talking about expanding the trail. We just put a bridge in at the park, building new, revitalizing Memorial Park. That's always a challenge. Natalie brought up funding grants. It's always a challenge whenever they need something or want to do something. Is to find that money. I don't know if there's something that you can help their department with as far as finding monies to do the one things.
One, and do you guys typically, do you work with like your county regional planning commission, or do you guys have like a grant writer you've worked with in the past, or how have you guys dealt with that historically? Does department heads kind of do it? What's your...
So Auburn Main Street executive director just got certified, so she's
Okay.
able to write some of those grants as well. The help grant, we did external grant writing to get that approved. But now that Ann is certified, we can certainly use her.
So, oh, go ahead, Mayor.
Well, I was gonna say also, we're working on, oh, there's Andy, he's here. He'll be getting Okra certified as well, but he can write, as long as you don't need that certification, he's written quite a few, so we do have someone in-house.
And there's
Well-
several in the area that we've used for bigger grants too.
Yes.
And then that cost of the grant writer is built into the grant.
100%.
Yep.
So you're doing a couple things that we're seeing a trend. One, if you can get in-house people certified or Main Street, whatever, it saves you money. Now, the shortfall in this is nothing at the Andy or Main Street is they haven't been grant writers for 20, 30 years. You know, they don't know every single program, right? So we're seeing a trend, and we're helping some communities do this is, you know, some of the really good grant writers around the state that have done this for a long time that we trust and recommend. It's like, okay, here's your capital plan. And we wouldn't say just look at parks, but we'll use parks as an example. Take your multi-year plan that you referenced earlier, Natalie, or take your capital plan that Eric puts together. And we say, hey, for, you know, $3,000 or $4,000 grant writer that's done this forever, can you review this 3-page plan for multiple years and identify what's going to be grant eligible and what the best program is? Because what often happens with kind of a new grant writer, right, is you chase a bunch of stuff. You get this person that's written 500 grants over their career, and they say, I'm not going to charge you the 50 grand to go write the grant. You can do that in-house. I'm going to tell you, of the 15 things you're probably eligible for, go write these 5. Okay. And then, you know, I can review it, whatever. That's what I would suggest to your question, Daryl, is this year, maybe through the capital planning process, we do that and say, you know, look at everything that we have in here. What should we write grants for in a particular focus on parks? Get you more bang for your buck. Other questions or? Oh, I did want to hit something too. You said, Daryl, and it actually goes to the pool from the 1970s as well. One, working with a lot of communities that are facing this in the last 5 years. You know, do we keep our pool? Do we go to a splash pad? Do we shut it down? But trails are similar. Additional greens. You know, people love to have pocket parks now. Things like this. This is one thing for the Parks Department. You always have to keep in mind as a council is, yeah, adding that trail is great. Adding that pocket park's great. Adding more green space is great. You have to keep it up, right? And pools are the shining example of this. I can show you how to finance a pool and build you a $5 million pool, because you can issue a bond, you can get a tax rate, you can do all that, and it's great. You have the nicest pool in Northeast Indiana. You can't use bonds to operate that pool, right? Just like you can't use bonds to operate a future green space or a trail, et cetera. That's what kills communities, is the 50 years of operations and upkeep. So keep that in mind, is, you know, and this whole process helps with that. As you guys are going to add things like that, it's like, yeah, we can get a grant for it. But Eric, does this, you know, we just added 27 acres of mowing. Are we hiring now a new person in the summer? Well, now there's a $10,000 cost center that we're adding into our budget every single year.
And your point is exactly why we don't have a pool. Because I went through as an employee trying to break even, and then I went through as a council member deciding whether to fix it or keep it open, and the operating costs were just a killer. So
Yep.
It costs less money to operate a skate park than it does a pool. So
100%.
it's,
Yep. So I guess we don't need a obviously decision today through this process, but I guess that's one I just leave with you, Mayor, Council, Natalie, et cetera. You know, do you want to do that fee analysis? It's not super difficult. The biggest thing with that is identifying every material program. You know, if you guys just do like, hey, it's the 1-day thing and, you know, it's $500 to operate, we're not going to look at that. But every material program or service that Parks provides, and I wouldn't say it's just parks. The reason it's focused on parks is because that's the one where you had the cash flow issues. But you can do this same type of analysis for any of your miscellaneous fee structures. If you want to do that, that's a process. You know, you got to create the cost support. Then you come back to council administration and say, okay, to 100, like the pool, to 100% support itself, these are the fees you have to charge. What most communities end up doing is saying, well, we don't go all the way there, but let's do 75% of that. We'll subsidize the rest. But to the point like Eric was making earlier, it's eye-opening because it's not just like, well, hey, we buy $5,000 worth of uniforms and bats or pennies for the soccer program or whatever it is. It's, well, how much does it cost for you to plan this, to maintain it, to operate it? Because all of that cost is coming through your tax supported side. Okay. All right. The fun one, Senate Bill 1. I'm sure all of you guys have at least seen something on this. I know, obviously, Natalie, you're very close and monitoring this. I put in your packets, I think it was Monday, well, a little bit of the history here. Several different iterations of this have came around. You know, from a city standpoint, AIM, Accelerate Indiana Municipalities, they're your advocacy arm that you belong to. We work very, very closely with them. We've been working with them all legislative session, testimony, calculations, etc. There was thought this was going to be much less painful to communities, and AIM felt like they're in a pretty good place. Sunday, I think it was, or Friday, an amendment came out, which is what you see here, that this will be pretty detrimental to local communities. Now there's AIC, that's the county arm. I'm sure DeKalb County is part of it. They're doing their own analysis. And then there's IASBO, that's the school board officials group. All three counties, townships too, but counties, cities, schools, public schools are going to be hit pretty hard by this. So all three of those advocacy agencies are, you know, they're putting their own information out, you know, asking, call your rep, so on and so forth. This is the AIM version that came out on Monday, okay? And it's, I don't know, 15, 20 pages, so I'm not going to read it all. But it goes through the main components of SB1. If you want to read SB1, I think it's 300 and some pages long. I can get you the link if you want to go through it all. I'm sure the mayor spent some time. I think it isn't there a mayor's meeting or something? Was it this week or next week or something? I thought AIM was planning. Okay, planning to. Yeah. Okay, that's the one yeah. So it's kind of an all hands on deck thing going right now. Yep. I'll summarize this kind of high level, and then let's just get into questions you have. The number one issue, and again, I'm not going to be political on this because some people can argue why it's a good idea. I'm saying from local government, from you guys providing service, the number one issue created here is the phase out of business personal property tax. Okay. So in a high level nutshell, your tax base is made up of some portion of personal business property tax. If that phases out over the next few years, like this is proposed, what that will do is lower your tax base. Okay. And as you guys know from past budget discussions, it's an equation. If your tax base goes down to provide the same amount of money, your tax rate has to go up. Okay. So while this is friendly for attracting business and businesses that have, machinery and inventory and things like this, love this idea. What it's going to do long-term is start to raise tax rates, which yours have been coming down here in DeKalb County. That will push more taxpayers to the tax caps, especially the 1% and some the 2%, which then results in you guys collecting less tax dollars because more people are hitting those thresholds. I would say the number one problem I see as a financial advisor with this, whether you like the idea and say, well, we'll draw a lot more business into Indiana and that'll make up for it, et cetera, is all the analysis this is being based on goes out 3 years. This is going to be just like tax caps, where they did the same thing 10 years ago. They did a 3 or 4 year analysis and said, oh, everything's going to be fine. Then when you got beyond that 3 or 4 years, and if you remember back in 2010, the economy tanked, none of the calculations worked anymore. And you started seeing communities losing millions, hundreds of thousands, depending on the size. We think you will see the same thing here. There will be unintended consequences 5, 10, 15 years out because your tax base will be so much lower. AIM is estimating the local government loss from this is, and I just saw it. Let's see that it's in my email. 1.5 billion in lost annual tax revenue to local governments a year. Now, the share of that to Auburn, I can't tell you today. Go ahead.
I pulled up a previous email that you and I worked on, and it shows approximately our budgeted revenue is about $22,500,000, and our business personal property tax makes up about 10% of that. So if this goes away, just based on the number today, we're looking at 2.25 million.
Yep.
So a year.
Now, again, the argument some legislators are making is, well, this will, the economy will keep humming along. This will spur even more investment, development, et cetera. It'll make up for that lost tax base. I can't say whether that's right or wrong because I don't have a crystal ball. What I can tell you is this sounds very similar to what happened 15 years ago and where we ended up at. The second piece that is incredibly concerning to this is, and this isn't a huge issue for Auburn because you guys don't issue a bunch of debt, but communities and schools and counties often issue debt with a tax rate to pay the debt back. If you are issuing debt based on a tax base that you know is going to go down in the future, we believe it's going to inhibit your ability to issue tax supported debt in the future, at least in this phase out number of years, as it phases out till tax basis steady. Or you're going to have to issue debt only on the non-personal business property portion of your tax base, which means the tax rate on the debt will be artificially higher than it needs to be. And so people will be paying more taxes than they otherwise would. Does that make sense? The market, when you go borrow money, doesn't want your repayment source to be unreliable. I guess that's the way I'm saying it. And this will create instability in that.
So what's going to happen to existing debt without 10 years or whatever, and the rates are set? And
the question hasn't been answered yet. The attorneys, I know the call AIM had an emergency call, I think on Monday morning. I know Ice Miller was on it. I think Barnes was on it. All the attorneys were raising this issue. Like, does this, not that communities would default, like not pay their debt, but does this create a default issue where the promises we made to bondholders no longer hold true? And that hasn't been either contemplated or answered by the legislators. The other couple of pieces I want to raise in this, reading my Cliff Notes. Depending on, again, this will sound somewhat political, but I'm not trying to be political, but if you're talking to your reps, et cetera, the question that AIM keeps pushing is, depending on the data you look at, Indiana is somewhere between the 5th and 10th most business-friendly tax state in the union. Okay, so we're already drawing. I mean, we're very tax-friendly, and that's even before you take into account where abatements occur at the local level and all of these things. So the question keeps being asked: why do we need to even get more? We're already the gold standard of business-friendly taxes. Why are we trying to push that more at the detriment of local government and schools? Okay, because that's because in essence, what this is going to do potentially is there's other provisions in the bill that allow for some local control over income taxes. Okay. And it's somewhat convoluted, but in a nutshell, where right now the county council has to pass a local income tax increase, local governments would have some say or some ability to make them pass a tax increase for your community. Okay. It's a summarized version. So if you think through this in steps, we're going to lower corporate, commercial, industrial tax rates because we're going to eliminate the business personal property tax. That's going to raise tax rates because it lowered our assessed value. So now homeowners are getting hit again, which is what they're trying to solve, which then they're giving some tax credits to homeowners and over 65 and veterans, et cetera, to try to draw that down farther. So we're kind of playing this shell game. But then when you're left holding kind of the shortfall locally, the solution is we'll go increase income taxes through the county. So it's a tax shift from business, corporation, industrial to people with income, workers, people that live here. Again, that sounds totally political. I'm just telling you what the math shows is going to occur.
Yes, so the article in the paper today in the Star commented about the city able to raise the tax like 1.13% or something. But you're saying the county would have to do that for us, or that would be the city?
Right now, the county, under current legislation, the county has to change the lit. In this legislation, it would give you power to make that decision made. So like, I can't remember how it's written, Natalie, it's like if you go to the county, they can't say no type thing. Still goes through the county raising it. It's like you have control over increasing your income tax rate.
How much control does the county have over
I'd have to go back because it says something about if multiple units want it raised or something like that. So I don't know if it's like you have to have a certain percentage of the units in the county. There's a 3,500 population threshold too. So you guys would be over that. The way it's been explained to me, but again, don't quote me because I've not read all 365 pages, is you guys would be large enough. If you're within the limits, you should be able to control your ability to create an income tax.
But that's of today, right now. So let's be conscious of there's still probably 8 to 12 days where all of that can be wiped out or more can be added in.
Right, you're talking about
The language,
SB 1 now.
the language specifically could be stripped or it could go back in. And let's remember, the process has to go to the governor and the governor has to sign the bill or not sign the bill.
As it stands right now, say that portion gets wiped out of SB 1, how much control does the county have of lit now?
All of it.
Right, so they could, if they want, correct me if I'm wrong, they can come in and say, you know what, we want to go to jail and take on the
Yeah, or they can just say, hey, you just lost to the mayor's number $2.1 million of like you guys could say, this is what would happen. Hey, we just lost $2 million of property tax in 3 years. We want to replace 2 million of that with income tax. It's going to take a rate of X, which is within our allowable number in this new legislation. But if they strip that language out, you're in the same spot you're in today. You're going to the county, in essence, begging them to increase that. And you have no control if they say no.
And the county's portion is 33% of their budget. So ours is about 10, right?
Yep.
So that's a bigger chunk.
So again, I think it's history repeating itself. What you saw in 2010, unintended consequences, lots of communities losing more money than was estimated, caused communities to then have to raise local fees, pilots, hydrant rentals, fire protection, all these fees locally, income taxes. I mean, you go back 10 years ago, all these income tax of it, public safety led, all this stuff didn't even exist because we didn't need it because we were using property tax. So they created all these lifelines kind of in reaction to, oh, shoot, this didn't come out the way we wanted it to. If communities are going to keep operating, we got to give them a way to do it. But what you have to like this will be a political comment. The politics of this is, hopefully nobody has me on record saying this, but it's true. So I guess I don't care that much. Yeah, it's great that we can reduce property taxes at the state level, right? Hey, we reduced your property taxes, we capped them, or we reduced them through all of SB1. Locally, you all get to vote on increasing income taxes, increasing water rates, increasing sewer rates. You deal with the fallout of your local ratepayers. Now, however much they understand or have read of this, of, well, why are you raising my income taxes now, City of Auburn? Why are you raising my water bill, City of Auburn? Why are you raising my electric rate, City of Auburn? And it's a very difficult discussion to educate someone and say, well, that's because we don't get as much money from property taxes from businesses, from personal property tax. So now you're paying for it.
State's kicking it down the can, kicking the can down the road to the local communities to raise the money.
Yep.
In essence, we want local control, right? Right? I mean, yes or no? I don't know. But it's got to be a phased-in approach if this is actually going to work, so that we can try to figure out what the right path is. And I don't know if they have the answer for that either.
And that's the question I've been getting for 45 days is, well, what can we do now? Because there's so many things, you hit some earlier, Chief. There's so many things that could change now. There's just, they could strip language. They could totally change this, whatever may come from it. What you're doing right now on the planning side is really what all you can do right now. Have a multi-year plan, have it prioritize capital operations debt, and then whatever comes through, good or bad, adjust that plan to react to it. Hopefully you have some control, to your point. Hopefully you have local control over income taxes if they cut business personal property, so you can at least offset some of it. But now we can change the plan and say, all right, council, if you're willing to do it and you put a 0.5% income tax in, that's going to generate X number of dollars, and we can now support the majority of this. If you don't have that control, now it's going to the county, and it's, will they do it? Or worst case scenario, it's, we can't offset the loss. What are we going to do on the expense side? Knowing your budgets as well as I do, if you have a $2 million loss, yes, you have cash reserves for a while to get through that. You can't cut, you're not going to solve this through just cutting some capital stuff. I mean, you're talking true recurring operational. And I know this is, but you can't cut that amount of money on an ongoing basis without talking about personnel. And that's just the facts of the game.
Well, and if you go down the rabbit hole of like what Florida did when they stripped it, you can look at their smaller communities to see what they do and how they tax locally. But I mean, those are the rabbit holes I've been going down just to see how they do it, because we don't have to recreate the wheel, but we have to be thoughtful of what that looks like, right? Yep. But again, we've got 15 days of who knows what's going to happen.
How does that work for fire territory? If we don't have that option to create an income tax for the territory, we're strictly relying on those property taxes.
That's where the piece in this with the 0.4% cap, we'd have to see when you start losing part of that tax base, because you're going to have, business personal property tax makes up part of your tax base too. If we stripped all that out when it's phased out here in a few years, if this passes, will your budget cause you to be over the 0.4% tax rate? If it does, now you have to figure out a solution. If it doesn't, it's just everybody's taxes, the residential taxes are going to be higher than they otherwise should have been, but you're still under the cap.
That part, from what I see, is if this goes through like this, is Auburn's growing, the West End, you get the housing complex coming in, those apartments to the north. Everything's growing, but we're going to have to be cut back. It's going to be very difficult.
And Chief, you go to another piece of this bill. So fast growing communities have been able and historically to appeal for what's called a 3-year growth appeal. And in summary, what that means is you're growing fast enough, your tax base growing fast enough that the 4% the last couple of years increase in max levy growth quotient, that's your tax base or tax pie increase, tax revenue increase, isn't enough to support it. You guys did one of these 2 or 3 years ago and got approved for it. So you say, hey, we're growing this fast, a lot faster than the rest of the state on average. We need more tax dollars to support this growth because we're hiring more police officers and firefighters and we're expanding our area and so on and so forth. And you get additional dollars to do that. That is proposed to be stripped from this. So not only do you have these issues, if you continue to grow fast like you have been going, you won't even be able to get the additional dollars you've gotten in the past for that. And an AIM came out and had a number. It's like of over 3,000 communities in the state, like, I don't know, was it?
Just over 2%.
Yeah.
About 70 communities.
I was going to say it was under 100.
Taxing units.
Yeah. Under 100 communities of over 3,000 have qualified for that. So it's not a problem. It's like, it's the donut communities of Indianapolis. It's places like you guys. It's like St. John, Indiana. It's these places where everyone's wanting to move, live, grow. That's who qualifies. The places that are stagnant don't get it anyway.
So with the first business property tax being eliminated, they're anticipating more business coming in to communities, which grows the community. So how are the communities then supposed to keep up with that?
Income tax.
Sounds like a good question for your representative. Fair coin.
Yeah.
Eric, would that also be another case in Doug's example to where civil could require more money from utilities to help?
100%. That's this is the whole basis of what I was talking about earlier, that it's going to be a shift to income tax. It's going to be the tax-based burden we just talked about, from corporate and industrial to the other tax, residential, all those. But then it's also locally going to create that, we were talking about earlier, the creativeness of all this let's take worst case scenario. You get all the bad parts of this and you don't get the local control parts that Natalie was talking about, and the county won't adjust income taxes for you. Now, what do you control in this room? Really, it's utility rates and local, what we were talking about in parks earlier, it's local fees and utility rates. So you start cutting service, cutting cost, and shifting revenue to those places, revenue increases to those places you control. And part of this too, I don't want to say there's not some good that can come out of this, because again, if you go back to tax caps in 2010, some of the shift we saw from that was communities becoming more fee-based, which I don't think is an awful thing if you can educate your public on it to understand, like, hey, when you pull a building permit, you're going to pay significantly more than you did in the past, because that building permit cost is going to fully fund everything related to it, and the salaries related to it, and the insurance related to the people that do it, and every step of that process. So we generate the money that it actually, to fully support it. Same thing I talked about in parks. We did this in LaPorte years ago. I remember in that analysis, like their vegetation fines were like, I'm making this up because it was 6 years ago, like $20 or something. Well, heck, they were the cheapest grass cutting, company in the city, because, hey, I didn't mow my lawn, I got a fine, whatever. So they go out, they mow the grass, you pay them 20. Now their fee's like 80 or something like that. It's their true fine. It's like, it forced communities to go look at every single one of those things and make them cost-based to be self-sufficient. The political problem with that is getting the public to understand, we used to, trash is another great example. Places that provide trash 30 years ago, community-based trash didn't usually have a fee associated with it. It came out of your property taxes. Your property taxes paid for trash service. There's almost minimal places in the state that no longer don't have a trash fee on their utility bill. That's why. because property taxes can't support it anymore. Those kind of shifts aren't all bad, but it definitely puts the blowback totally locally when you have to make those changes. All right. Anything else on that? Because I know we're over time. There's a lot of, I gave you guys the handout. AIM has a great summary. Like I said, IAC, IASBO has other ones. At the back of this, I put the LSA. It's a little bit old. I think you guys have all seen this. I think it's from a month ago. I put the LSA calculations for lost revenue estimates for both the county overlapping units and the city of Auburn. It's not in material numbers. So I want you all as department heads just to take that into account. We're doing what we can to plan for this. Tighter budgets, more accuracy, multi-year plans. But keep this in the back of your mind that if some of this stuff comes to fruition, it's going to create some issues in the next 5 years for spend. Anything, Mayor, you want to add to that or questions from the council? Okay, more to come. Last thing we had, this was one I think was on the, or Natalie, you had added or asked a question about, was where wages sit. So back in 2022, we did a wage study, gave recommendations to the city. There was also parts of those recommendations like COLA, cost of living adjustments, et cetera, to stay in line or to move. I know there's been changes in departments and stuff related to this, clerk treasurer's office, et cetera. I think what needs to happen is, one, what is the city's goal with wages? And SB1 could change what the city's goal is with wages. If you remember in that, those that were here in that 22 study, you had comps or comparative communities and benchmarks, and you had like the low, hopefully this rings a bell with people, like the low, mid, high range, okay, of like, where do we want to get within the pay scale and pay range? That's 3 years ago, significant changes in the economy since then. I don't know where you sit in those ranges, and those comps have obviously changed since then. So there's a couple things you can do. You can go back to the comps in 2022, use kind of national and regional increases and say, you know, here's the trend that's happened since 2022. So now here's kind of your mid pay scale point. Then we work with clerk treasurer, HR, where do your salaries sit in that? So it's kind of like a simplified version. It's not a compensation study. It's really just saying this is where you are today versus if you manually kind of adjust based on regional trends. I think that is probably what you need to then look at it as a council and as administration and say, okay, are we even getting to where we wanted to get from 3 years ago? Are we falling farther behind? And then you guys can decide. And I wouldn't do it for like every position in the city. I would just do like a sample, because it's going to be, you know, you do some department heads, you do some different positions out of your PACE salary ordinance. It's going to give you a feel for, you know, are you making progress like you wanted to 3 years ago? So that's something like Jada, that's who some of you guys I know met with Jada's team 3 years ago that were here. That's something, you know, Jada can do if you want her to. Again, it's not she doesn't have to come interview anybody. It's just getting your current pay ordinance, updating the comps, and kind of providing you guys a summary report, and then looking for next steps.
Yeah, I think that's what the simplest way of doing that, and probably fastest to get back to us, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to see if there's a problem even. Because you may look at it and say, oh, well, you know, we're in pretty good shape. We just need to make sure we're doing COLA and things like that. Or you may see and say, oh, shoot, we actually lost ground because of all the inflationary pressures.
And I know Councilman Webb touched on this last year during our meetings too, is he wanted some sort of comparison for elected officials as well.
Yep.
Okay.
On the elected officials piece, I should have looked at this before I came. Do any of you remember, were elected officials in that 2022 study? They likely
I do
weren't.
not recall.
I don't think so.
They typically aren't unless you specifically want them in there. The right way to do that piece, Natalie, is just like they all did. It doesn't take a lot of time, but council and elected administration fill out the questionnaire, like what is my role, what is my duty, this is what I do, because then Jada can take that and make sure the comps are accurate. Because, you know, a mayor of Auburn could do something dramatically different than, or have a dramatically different role than, you know, the mayor of Dayton, Ohio, or something like that. Same thing with council. I mean, there's full-time councils in some of these comparables. Like, we don't want to be comparing your
Yep.
pay to, you know, Akron, Ohio, that has a full-time council potentially, or something like that.
Let's do that.
One other thing I'd like to just mention, I was talking with HR one day. Currently with our medical insurance within the city, if an employee's spouse, if their coverage would allow that employee to be on their policy, they can opt out of taking city insurance as long as they have coverage. We have a carve out currently where no spouse, unless if they're no spouse that is offered insurance coverage, they, you know, that we have a carve out with the city. But we were talking about those employees that don't take, and I'm thinking citywide, that don't take the insurance coverage because they have spousal coverage that allows them to be on that plan. You know, they're saving the city, what, Tina, is it an average of about $600 a month per employee, roughly, for the cost of medical? They're saving the city money. Now, something that I'd like to look into, but there are other communities that would give that employee some sort of stipend, and it's not even 50% of that. I mean, what was the realistic numbers that we've seen, Tina?
So I've seen anywhere from like $150 to $250
A month.
Given that to the employer. Not taking the insurance, but they have to prove that they have.
Yeah, they have to show the proof.
Can't opt out of people's money.
Yeah, we've definitely looked at that.
Just something to think about. I mean, it makes sense because they are, I mean, by not taking the insurance and opting out because they have other coverage, I mean, they're saving, if you add that up over, I don't know exactly the number of employees that don't have it, we can look, but they're saving the city a significant amount of money, and that's a benefit they're not getting that everybody else does. That's the way I look at it. So just wanted to put that out there on the radar.
And that can, where we've seen another, you can encourage more people to do that, where they may have the option to go on their spouse and it costs them $100 or $200 a month to do that. Well, they look at it and say, well, I can get it for free through the city. I'm just going to stay on the cities. Well, now they can start actually being incentivized to move over.
Hey, Eric, you touched on the COLA, Natalie, both with SB1 and the tariffs, does that affect COLA?
TVA.
Now if I could answer that, I would be on TV somewhere on a island retired probably, but
Back to the elected officials, I think we need to really look at what other areas in Indiana have internet TV services. So we have, I mean, there's not a lot of them. And this is what the mayor and the clerk and us are involved with, or this, you know, we have three utilities in AES. So we should compare what's being done in other areas for the job description.
and that's exactly what will come out in these questionnaires that you guys and other elected officials have to fill out, because those are the things then that Jada's team looks at and says, well, you manage X number of departments, 3 utilities, and a quasi other department in AES. That's a higher burden than a similar sized community that has privatized electric and privatized water and only sewer, as an example. Anything else on the wage questions? Well, I'll talk to Jada and get you guys some information on that. That was all I had. We had some time for questions and closing. Hopefully, I don't know if you guys had anything on your agenda. I know I took basically the whole time. But anything from you guys for me while we're here? Todd, you look like you want to ask a
I feel
question.
depressed. I feel depressed. I need a pick me up, so.
Just don't read any more about SB
Get
one.
out of here for lunch at some point. Get pick me up, kids.
Well, let me brighten your day. And please, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding, I've read this multiple times, everything that has come through since the beginning of the year. Most of the effect is going to be on the civil side. Utilities, yeah, you may incur some additional cost as a result of that, but I think it's less detrimental to the utilities than it is the civil side of the budget. So hopefully that gives you a peace of mind, but there's a lot of us that we still have to think about.
Depressed.
Okay, well, I tried.
You didn't fix me.
All right.
Hey,
Still depressed. I'm hurt for my brother in here. I'm out of just being in utilities.
I will say for like what the mayor just said though, like if you go back to tax caps, and yes, it was hammered a lot of communities. There's no community in the state of Indiana that went out of business or can't provide service. Now, did a lot of things get put on the local taxpayer, ratepayer, et cetera? Yes. And did more lifelines get thrown through income tax legislative changes over that 10-year period? Yes. I have faith. There will be a lot of things that are hard to manage in this. We'll get through it, and the legislatures even came out and said if they do this, there's unintended consequences, which I would say is guaranteed. There's going to be unintended consequences when you're using a 3-year planning study over something that's going to take effect over the next 20. They'll come back and fix it. So I would say there needs to be a lot of pressure if that happens to come back and fix it. And on a high note, though, does everybody feel a lot better about the process we're going to do for budgets this year versus last year? Now that you know what's coming, nobody's like totally freaking out when you walk out of this. Okay, there you go.
What I heard is nobody's gonna know what.
We'll get there. We'll get there.